Welcome, everyone. This is Debbie Mayberry with National Kitchen and Bath Association. You're here for communicating and presenting your designs to build value with Dwayne Becker. He's a territory sales manager with ACPI, but he also has his own training organization called SAPRE, I believe it is. So, Dwayne, if you're there, we're ready to get started, and thanks for being with us.
Hey, my pleasure. Happy to be here. Actually, the name of the company is Sapre. I keep trying to decide whether I want to put an accent over the E, but so you were close with that.
Well, thank you.
Um, to give you a little bit of oh, by the way, I live in Maine, and it is about mid to high 70s today, but very humid, just like all most of the rest of the country, it seems. For a little bit of an overview of myself, I have been in the kitchen and bath industry for a little over 13 years, and I've been in sales for a little over 18 years. And how this all came about is I've been a kitchen designer. Previous to that, I was in a custom cabinet shop for a number of years in Portland, Maine. So learning the ins and outs of building fine cabinetry. And I started my career in sales down in Massachusetts, actually. And my first career move out of graduate school was in theatrical lighting design. And so I really learned a lot about color, balance, uh, how to create a focal point, all the things that are important in a good design from that. And everything between that and sales and cabinetry, I have now combined into what I currently do. So, what I have discovered over the years with working with many kitchen designers is that I have discovered that frequently there are two extremes of a kitchen designer. There is the individual who can design a really good kitchen, but they have trouble selling it. Sometimes they can't even give it away. And then I see other people that are really good salespeople, you know, the sort of person that can sell ice to an Eskimo, but they're kind of so-so when it comes to kitchen design. So what I try to do is I try to take both of those ideas, merge them together to help people do both all together at once, because that, I think, as a kitchen designer, is what you really need to be able to do. Because, like it or not, as a kitchen designer, you're a salesperson. Now, I know that a lot of people out there really don't like the sound of that, especially if you come from an artistic or design or interior design background. But the truth of the matter is, you are. And that does not mean you have to take on the sales mini role of being a possible untrustworthy person or imply that what you do is a negative thing. It only means that you are there to help coach your clients through a decision process. And, you know, to quote a phrase um, that, by the way, nobody is really sure who came up with it originally, um, nothing happens until somebody sells something. So, you know, you can be the best kitchen designer out there, but unless you can sell it, you're not going to get anywhere. So, with that in mind, looking at some of the sales aspects of things, as a salesperson, you should know your closing ratio and you should be tracking your sales. How else do you know if you're being effective or not? Now, being aware of your closing ratio will help you in a number of ways. It'll help you plan your day-to-day business. For example, if you're closing one out of every 5 projects you take on, you can then figure out how many people you need to greet to meet your goals, either weekly, monthly, quarterly, or yearly, because the rest is just simple math. Um, Also, by tracking your close rate, you can determine how effective you're being and how effective your process is. And then you can reevaluate where you are at with that regard. Also, since you are a salesperson, know where your monthly or yearly target, what your monthly or yearly target is, and where your sales are relative to this number. Not only will this help you be aware of uh, where you're at in real time relative to your efforts, but you'll also know the answer when invariably your supervisor will come and asks you where you're at. And that way, in your studio or showroom, you will be viewed as the salesperson that is completely on top of their game because you know the answers right off the top of your head because you've been tracking that information. Another thing that might be beneficial um, when it comes to tracking is tracking your sales by product. Um, Really more for your own benefit than anything else. What I've discovered when I was designing is I thought at one point out of the 4 primary brands that I had to sell that I sold primarily 2 brands. Come to find out, I sold primarily 3, and those 3 brands that I sold were all balanced my sales very evenly between all 3. But I wouldn't have known that if I didn't track my sales by brand. So where you might think that you sell the same amount of brand A as brand B, you might be surprised to discover it's a little bit different. But until you track those numbers, you wouldn't know. So brands, I just mentioned that a lot. Speaking of brands, many products are very similar out there, and there's a vast array of competing products out there, especially in this industry, and many of them are very similar one to the other. Now, you might believe that the product you have to offer is superior, especially if you're in the know in the industry. You might truly believe that you have a great product to sell. Now, you may try to convince your client of this, but the number one thing that will primarily make the sale is you. So, this means that your job is to figure out how to differentiate yourself from your competitors. What can you do to be unique, different, and stand apart from them and provide unexpected value for your clients? Now, that is what is going to help you to win over your competition, not the product you're selling. Now, notice I said provide unexpected value for your clients. I say that because value is not something you add or something you include. Value is something you give, or what I prefer to say is provide. Value is something you provide for your clients without necessarily expecting something in return. So, how do you provide value for your clients? How many different ways can you do that? Well, one thing you can do is find a way to create a truly unique experience for your client. Create a remarkable experience. Now, the reason I use the word remarkable is because that means that the experience is worth remarking about. So let's take an extreme example. If you went to this restaurant, which some of you might be scared to look at some of the sharks floating around, but if you did, uh, tell me that you wouldn't be telling all your friends about that experience. I don't care if the food is mediocre or maybe even lousy. It's such a unique experience that everybody that hears about it will want to go to experience what you just saw and told them about. So I'm not saying that you should create a Shark Tank in your showroom, but if you can find ways to create a very unique experience that is truly different from your competition, then it is worth remarking about, and word will get out about what you did for your clients and what the overall experience was like. So, another thing to keep in mind regarding the value you're giving your clients is to craft a value proposition. Now, what is a value proposition? A lot of people in sales talk about that a lot, but a lot of people don't really get into the details of what that really means. So, a lot of people think that a value proposition, or they don't think this, but this is how it comes out, is features and benefits. A value proposition is not features and benefits. Okay? It's very different. A value proposition is the ultimate value your product or service brings to people as it is perceived by the client. Now, this, whatever that value is, it doesn't necessarily have to be something that can be monetized. Okay? Something of true value cannot always be commoditized. You can't put a number on it. Also, keep in mind one other thing, and that is that the last half of this phrase, the ultimate value your product or service brings to people as it is perceived by the client. If your client does not perceive it as valuable, then guess what? It's not valuable. What does that mean? Well, that means you need to figure out what is going to be truly valuable to that particular client, because every single client you have is going to perceive one thing as valuable different from the last client you have. So that can be a little tricky. So, for example, now also the value proposition. Depending on your value proposition and how you craft it, you may speak it to your customers so that they have an understanding of what you are about. But even more so, that can be very scripted and very uh, ingenuine or disingenuous at some times. So what I like to think about it as is not something that you would necessarily speak, but something that you can use to help guide you through your process so that you can re-examine it step by step and think about whether you are still focused on your goals. For example, my value proposition. I help my clients show their designs using presentation and sales methods to provide value and increase sales. So this helps guide me when I'm sitting down with designers so that I can question, okay, am I talking about presentation skills? Am I talking about design skills? And am I talking about things that that designer is going to perceive as valuable? And if I question that each step of the way, I and I can then look at it and see if I'm on the right track with my conversation. So now I'd like to talk about one thing that is very important to understand when you are sitting down and talking with a client. And that is, what is the number one reason that people do not buy? Now, I've heard a lot of answers to this question, about price, wanting to shop around competitors. Um, that's kind of sort of getting at it, but there's a more all-encompassing reason that people do not buy. And that simply is fear. Fear of almost anything or everything imaginable. More specifically, some ideas. Fear that I'm paying too much money. Fear that I've never done this before. I don't know how the whole process works. Fear that I'm going to be criticized by all my friends for making odd decisions or strange choices. Fear that my whole world is going to be turned upside down. That's the number one people that do not buy. Are the number one reason, excuse me, that people do not buy. This combined with this very interesting statistic. 30% of consumers that shop for a new kitchen or bathroom model end up not buying anything. Now, the reason that is the case, or the reason that these people said this was the case, this information came from a major kitchen and bath industry publication a couple years ago. They determined that the reason that most people gave that they were not buying anything is that they get overwhelmed with too many choices and decide to live with what they have. Okay, so what does that mean if I'm a kitchen designer? Well, if you think about it, that means that as much as 30% of the time, my biggest hurdle with the customer is not my competition. My biggest hurdle is overcoming the status quo to provide enough value in the project and myself to persuade my client or compel my client to move forward with their project. Now, that's an interesting thing to realize and look at. So if your customer decides that they're not ready to buy yet, it may not be because they want to shop around. It may be because they haven't seen yet the value in what you've done and what you've presented to compel them to give up the status quo. What is another way you can provide value for your clients? Well, one of the ways you can do it is how you go about presenting your work. So here's what I see frequently from designers is that they will say, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I have a great complete kitchen for you. Let me show you a few images of your kitchen. And so they bring up a couple images. Wow, that's really beautiful. I love that. Oh, yes. And then they immediately start frequently jumping around to, oh, yeah, over here is where your trash pullout's going to be that you said you liked. And I've put over here that silverware drawer that you said you liked the idea of. And isn't that marvelous? And they jump into maybe a few other ideas. Oh, yeah, you said you wanted a wine bar over here. So I put that over here on the side, and that coordinates really nicely the finish with the island. And they jump around a little and present all those ideas, and then they start looking at the price. And the problem with that is you haven't validated the price by explaining everything that's included enough yet, so that you haven't provided or shown the customer the value in what you've done yet. So one way to get around that is show them the pretty pictures first, but then make sure they understand everything that you've done and why. So here's a way to do it. In presenting your work, most customers don't really know all the fine details of what a ground plan is. In other words, they don't know necessarily that, say, this is a tall cabinet or a cabinet over the refrigerator, or this is a wall cabinet over a base cabinet. They don't see that. But if you print out an elevation like what's here on the left for them, that's very visual and they can follow along. Then Step through the entire kitchen in a logical fashion, work on one end, and go through it in a logical order so that they can follow you with their eyes, and talk about every single cabinet that's in there. Suggest what that cabinet may or may not be used for. Um, Not may not be used for, excuse me, might be used for based on what you know about your customer. But here's the important thing. If you have done anything to that cabinet that is not the run-of-the-mill, out-of-the-box cabinet, if you will, talk about it. For example, here in this wall cabinet to the left of the hood, Mr. Smith, you said you wanted some glass here, so I put some glass on either side of the hood for a nice accent. Doesn't that look nice? Yes, it does. Okay, great. Also, since there's glass in here, I'm going to do a finished interior so that the inside will be finished to match the outside of the cabinet since we're seeing through that. Oh, okay. Wonderful. Now, you also mentioned that you wanted, for example, lighting in the top of these two glass cabinets. So the other thing I did for you is I installed glass shelves in here so the light will travel through the shelves into the entire cabinet. Okay, now every time you mention something like that, the customer is thinking, that's costing me more money, that's costing me more money, that's costing me more money. Because they might even come up with a question like, okay, when you do that, does that mean this is going to cost a little more? Well, yes, but I'm telling the factory to build it that way so that it will do this, this, and this. Okay, now, and then I might even say I put a flush finished end on it over here because we see that side of the cabinet and we want that to be finished nicely to match everything. Ask the customer, do you know what that means? Explain it to them so they understand it. Explaining it to them so they understand it does a couple things. It puts the seed in their head so that about what it is so that if they go shopping and they have somebody else do a similar layout, they might ask for that very same feature on their exposed ends, for example. And that frequently will create a adversarial relationship with some designers because the designer might think, what does this person know that he's talking about? I know how to do this. So if that adversarial relationship does then occur, that customer most likely will come back to you because you educated them on what that's about. But more importantly, you built value in what you've done and you've shown your customer the importance of what you've done and that you are thinking about these fine details in their kitchen. So every single time you mention one of these little changes on a cabinet, the customer is thinking more money, more money. You can see the dollar signs rolling over in their eyes. And if they like it, you're getting hopefully their approval on each cabinet before you move on to the next cabinet. So that two things will happen by the time you're done going through the entire kitchen and explaining everything, all the cabinets, and what you've done in the space. Two things will happen. They've already approved the entire kitchen by the time you're done because they've approved each cabinet, saying, yes, that will work for me there. Also, hopefully, by mentioning every single thing that you've done to each cabinet, you have given them the impression by the time you're done, hopefully, that there's no way I, as a customer, am going to be able to afford this kitchen. That's the impression you want to leave them when you're done reviewing the entire kitchen. I call it validating your design, really showing the customer the value of the design so that when you get around to presenting the price, after you've done all of this, hopefully a reaction that you could get from the customer is something along the lines of, oh, does that price include all that glass you mentioned in the cabinets? Oh, does that include all that decorative crown molding that you pointed out? Yes, it does. Oh, so hopefully they'll be, oh, all right. they're going to come off the ceiling from where they thought the price was going to be on the kitchen. So price, presenting the price. This is where a lot of people get nervous, and a lot of people are afraid to present the price. But here's what I see a lot. It's almost like um, designers are trying to scare their clients. I'm like, what are you doing? You know, they'll present that kitchen is $32,595. Really? Oh my God, I'm spending $32,000 on the kitchen? Yeah, no, don't scare your customer. It's for the reason that it's for the same reason that automobile dealers look at their ads on TV, listen to how they talk about the price. It's 32,595, or it's 32,590, or it's 32,400. What does that do to the price? It makes it seem insignificant. It makes it seem like, okay, this customer has this much in their pocket, and they're probably going to, once they know all the information they need to know, take it out of their pocket and plunk it down on the table right in front of me. That's how you need to treat how to present the price. So the price on your kitchen is 32,595. Now, if it's 32,595 and 45 cents, which sometimes it might be, you might want to even be a little more vague. What I used to do is I used to point to the price at the bottom of whatever sheet I was showing them, and I would say, okay, your kitchen is 32,500 and change. That sounds very insignificant, and I'm not going to scare them because you know what? Based on what I did for that design and that kitchen and what's in it, yes, it should cost 32,595. So why should this be a problem? So it sounds a lot less scary. It shouldn't be scary. Make it seem insignificant and present it as such. Don't make it sound like a big deal. Okay? Now, once you've presented the price, next step is hopefully asking for the sale. So here's a very, very interesting statistic. Across all industries, studies show that much of the time, the reason salespeople do not close is that they never ask for a commitment. And while it varies per industry, surveys indicate that the percentage of salespeople and professionals who never ask for any form of commitment ranges between 50 and 90%. That's a little amazing. The average across all industries seems to be around 60%. Unbelievable, right? I mean, why would someone put all that work and planning into a project and yet not ask for a commitment? Does that seem a little odd to you? Yet research done by Huthwaite International proves that asking at least one closing question raises your success rate by 36%. Neil Rackham at Huthwaite Institute puts it this way: traditional closing techniques are not the best way to obtain a commitment from a customer in a major sale. But as we've seen, doing nothing isn't effective either. The sale won't close itself. So ask for the sale, get a commitment from your client somehow. I mean, there are lots of different ways to do that. You may or may not feel comfortable with certain ways, but you've put all that work into it. Hopefully, your customer has committed to it to some degree. Ask them for the sale. Now, you've done all the presentation, you've presented the price, you've asked for the sale. Maybe there are a few more details to work out, or the customer just isn't ready to purchase yet. What's the next step? Well, the next step is to determine the next step. Okay. So, have you ever had issues contacting a client after a meeting and to get them committed? I talk to designers all the time that, they try to call people back, they email them, no response, their phone calls go to voicemail. It's like the people fell off the face of the earth. Well, one thing that you can do to avoid that is set the next appointment with your customer. Okay, that would be the next step. This appointment could be a face-to-face meeting. It could be a phone call. We're going to talk next Thursday, Mr. Smith. Does that work for you? Yes. Okay, so we'll talk on Thursday around 1 o'clock. Okay, so that appointment can be a phone call, but at least you've determined what the next step is. Another thing you can do is sometimes when it's too late in the process, you've discovered that the customer has lost interest in the project. Well, one way to determine whether that interest is waning earlier on in the process is to assign homework to the customer. Get a little bit of a commitment back from them. For example, okay, I've done this great kitchen for you, but some of this might need to be changed or tweaked a little because, as you said, you're not sure whether your ceiling height is entirely accurate. So when do you think you might be able to get me that accurate information on your ceiling height? In a couple days? Say on Saturday or next Monday? Okay, great. So why don't you give me a call next Monday? What time would work for you? Set up a time. Now you've got a little bit of a commitment from them so that if for some reason uh, Monday goes by and you don't hear from them, A, you've got a reason to call them back and hopefully get in touch with them. And B, now you can then, now little red flags are going off, wondering, okay, is the customer losing interest? Have they moved on? Are they shopping around? What's going on? Why don't they have that information back to me? Another thing you might want to do to assign homework is, let's say, appliances. Um, in your kitchen, uh, this is an idea of a tall oven cabinet for that built-in wall oven, but I've noticed that you said you haven't selected a model yet. When do you think you might be shopping for appliance models? Oh, well, we're probably going to be going shopping next weekend. Okay, so do you think it would be realistic by maybe Tuesday after the weekend for you to have the model numbers chosen and give me that information so that I can make sure that this cabinet is going to work for you in your design? Yeah, I think that would work for us. Okay, great. Then set up an appointment to talk with that information. Once again, if they haven't had a chance once that Tuesday comes around to do that appliance shopping, now a couple more red flags might be going off. So you might be wondering where they're at in the process and wondering if they're starting to lose interest. One really big important thing about that next step or next appointment, whether it be by phone or in person, is to review a brief agenda of what is going to be accomplished at that next appointment. Um, let's say you have all the information, you're not waiting for anything, and you want this person to buy this kitchen. So, one way to do that might be okay, so why don't we, usually at this point, Mr. Customer, my customers set up a follow-up appointment where we do all the necessary paperwork, and you give us a check, and we submit an order for these cabinets and the flooring. Does that make sense to you? Yes, no. Yeah, it does. Okay, great. So let's set up an appointment for Tuesday, which brings me to my next point, and that is appointment setting. I know a lot of people who frequently get frustrated when it comes time to set the appointment with the client, in that the client either doesn't show up at all or shows up late, which can really ruin the day, especially if you have a very booked day. Uh, One way to help avoid that, and it works very well, I've gotten a lot of feedback from people, is to set your appointments not on the full hour or the half an hour, because in our culture, for whatever reason, that's kind of ish. So let's say 7 o'clock is kind of ish. If I show up around 7:15, 7:20, that's fine. 7:30 is kind of ish. Not only is it kind of ish, um, if I'm the customer, I might not remember the time. Did we say 6:30 or 7:30? I don't remember. So try this next time instead. Set your appointments at the quarter hour and three-quarter hour. Set your appointments for, say, 7:15 or 7:45. Two things come into play there. It is very, very specific. So much of the time, or most of the time, the customer will remember the time. They will remember that you said 7:15. They won't forget that. The other thing it will do is, it's so specific most of the time, they will not only not be late, they will usually be early to that appointment. It works very well. The other thing it does for you is it makes you sound busy. If you set your appointment for 7:15, the customer has the impression that you're trying to squeeze them in. So, and everybody wants to do business with somebody who's busy. I mean, if you've got two restaurants side by side and one is packed with people and the other isn't, well, the one that's not probably doesn't have very good food. I want to eat the one that's packed with people. I may not want to wait in line, but I want to do business with somebody who's busy because that means they're doing a good job. So you can sound busy by setting your appointments in that fashion. So another thing with appointment setting is, of course, get a commitment from the customer on what works. Here's another thing on appointment setting that I hear, and that is, well, I'm here 8 to 5 on Tuesday. What time would work well for you? Uh, I'm going to digress for a second. Have you ever seen a keynote presentation by Steve Jobs, or there's another executive, a CEO of a company? It's a woman. I can't remember what company or who she is. But anyway, she and when Steve Jobs was around, always dressed exactly the same way. They always wore the same clothes, always wear the same clothes. Why is that? Well, the reason for that is because these people are extremely busy people. And by wearing the same clothes every day, it's one less decision their brain needs to make at the beginning of a day. So picture your client being a very, very busy person. You've just given them an entire day's window to decide when they want to show up. Couple things come into play there once again. You're not busy if you say what time works for you. They have the impression that they could come in anytime they want and it doesn't matter. Also, you're asking them to make a decision that might be difficult for them to make. So instead, give them a choice of one or the other. More specifically, would you be able to come in next Tuesday? Yeah, Tuesday would be good. Okay, would you prefer morning or afternoon? Afternoon. All right, great. I have an opening at 1:15 and I also have an opening at 3:45. Which works best for you? Actually, 1:15 works best for me. Okay, great. So let's set up an appointment for 1:15. Review once again the agenda, what you're going to accomplish at that appointment, reconfirm the appointment, and you're done. Regarding all of these steps are small commitments from the client because it's not just about you giving them commitments. You will do this, you will price it at that, but you need to get commitments from them each step of the way. And I promise you that if you use just one of these techniques, if you're not already, that you will be successful and you will sell more and make more money. So here's to your success. And If anybody wants to pursue any of these ideas further, this is my contact information, which I'm sure Debbie is more than happy to provide as well. Um, I am very happy to consult with people one-on-one and or also consult and or train a group of people at a given company. So now, if anybody has any questions or comments about anything I just presented, I believe Debbie is going to present or talk about any questions.
Great. Yes, Dwayne, thank you. That was really interesting. The step-by-step process. I think lots of people have been taking notes, and we do have some questions already, and I encourage more questions. So let's get started on the questions. So someone earlier had been asking, how can you get the clients to share a budget? She said they seem to think we will overspend if we know what they have to spend.
That's a question I get frequently, and yes, that is, I believe, what clients are thinking, which is why they don't want to divulge what that budget is. And I have found uh, two ways that tend to work. First of all, if I discover that the client is hesitant to give me a budget number, I explain to them very nicely. And I've done this so many times, I kind of have it scripted in my head. I say, look, the reason I need to know that figure or roughly is because, first of all, if I'm going to design a kitchen project for you, it doesn't, it wastes your time and it doesn't make any sense for me to go designing a $25,000 kitchen if you have $12,000 to spend. So I need to know what direction to head and or to head in. And also, by giving me that budget number, I can make choices along the way as I'm doing the design to help to keep you close to that budget number. Don't say within, because then you've shot yourself in the foot if you go over their number. Close to that budget number. Now, hopefully, oh, and then also explain, so yeah, I don't need the number so that I go out of my way to spend every penny you've got to spend, but I need to know what choices to make to keep you close to that number. And then much of the time with that explanation, the customer will, oh, all right, we were thinking such and such dollars. What's great about that, once you do get that number, is then you can also, now, hopefully you're asking that question once you have an understanding of what the client wants to accomplish, uh, because then you can also prepare the client for whether that's a realistic number or not. Hopefully, with your experience, you can then look at your client and say something to the effect of, okay, I think we can work with that. Or, uh, I don't think that's a realistic budget for what you want to accomplish. I think you need to rethink this. Or that's a little tight, but and challenging, but let's give it a shot. It's going to be close. And that way, in that scenario, for example, then when you've overshot their budget by 10%, yeah, you've already prepped them for that. Does that answer your question? Does that help?
I think so. That was good. Um, so several people, thank you, Dwayne. So several people were asking the similar question. Could you give us some examples of closing the sale questions?
Uh-huh, sure. Um, it's first of all, yes, it's an uncomfortable situation to be in sometimes for some people. Uh, but just ask plainly and calmly. Look, Mr. Smith, we've reviewed everything. You said you liked everything. I'm very close to or within what you said you needed to be for budget. Um, would you like to proceed with getting this ordered? Or um, here's another one. Uh, let's set up Okay, I understand you're not quite ready to make this purchase at this point. Uh, why don't we set up, once you've had a chance to review everything, why don't we set up a follow-up meeting where we can then finalize everything and submit the proper paperwork, sign off on the paperwork, and submit these orders uh, on such and such date. Does that process make sense to you? Or does that doing that at our next meeting make sense to you? Yes, it does. Okay, great. Um, it just plainly ask. And if they say, this was more than we wanted to spend, something like that, now it's time to dig into a conversation. Let's talk about that. Okay, tell me more about that is a great phrase. Tell me more about that to get someone talking about their reactions to something. Um, but just ask them. I hope I answered the question.
That sounds good. Thank you, Dwayne. So let's see, there's another one here. This is more of a comment, but someone said, is it a good idea? Hold on a second, I'm sorry. Is it a good idea to hold off on details like plans, elevations, specs until the kitchen is sold? And how much can you give without giving it away?
Uh, okay, I'm focusing on the how much can you give without giving it away. I don't fully understand that question. But uh, regarding the details comment, what you may want to do, and you'll know based on your relationship with the client, is you may want to review. I think it's important to review all the details in the kitchen when you're doing the presentation. Absolutely. But your customer might not be ready to hear the price yet. So don't necessarily launch into the price until they're ready to hear what that is yet. Maybe that will be something you might want to hold off on until they're ready to pursue things. If you get a sense that they're not ready to move forward with things just yet. But sure, why not review the details? Because the details and what you've done with the details are what is going to sell the job. Um, I guess that's all I have to say on that. Anything else? I'm sorry if I'm not commenting, but I don't have visibility to all of the questions.
Can you hear me, Dwayne?
Yes,
Okay, good. Here's another one. Have you ever had salespeople set up a presentation book that includes information about how they work and their processes and their process and what makes them special?
absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a great thing to print out. Um, one, I talked about reviewing this and how you're unique and talking about it, but things that you talk about, a customer will readily forget 10 minutes later. If you put it in print and in writing, not only do they enjoy it because it's something tangible that they can hold on to and take away with them, they can refer to it later when they're talking over dinner and they say, "Didn't she mention something about that?" "Why, yes, she did. It's right here on the page with that we took home." "Oh, all right." Yeah, by all means, print it out, hand out stuff to them so that they have tangible items to take with them. Absolutely.
Great. Okay, so here's another one. What do you do if after the complete extensive design phases, which include presenting the design, the value, the budget, etc., and the client does not want to pay the full design service? So what do you do?
The full design service, meaning does not want to pay that overall figure?
I think that's what they're
Yeah, okay.
implying.
Um, well, it depends on how they phrase it, first of all. Does not want to are they saying, and I'm not asking, this is a rhetorical question, are they saying, well, I refuse to pay that much? Or is what they're saying really just an emotional reaction to the price, which is much of the time also. For example, I see some designers that frequently look for ways to lower the price when the customer says to them, well, that's more than I really wanted to spend. Okay, that's more than I really wanted to spend is not them saying they're not going to spend it. It's not them saying they don't have it to spend. It's just an emotional reaction to the overall price. How many of us have ever gone shopping for a car and discovered that it's more than we really wanted to spend? Every time. But we end up buying something anyway, right? So listen to how they're expressing the reaction to the price. If it's that's more than I wanted to spend, or what I commonly hear too is that's more than I was expecting, that's just an emotional reaction. That doesn't mean they're not going to spend it, and that doesn't mean that you should immediately look for ways to lower it. Now, if they say, I'm not going to spend that, now you can just ask them plainly, um, okay, uh, why is that? That seems kind of a strong reaction. Uh, my guess is that if that reaction is that strong, then you haven't shown enough value in what you've done and in everything to justify that price.
Okay, good answer. There's a comment here from someone, and this person says that they don't do anything until they commit to working with them. So that's just a comment.
Well, sure, absolutely. Yeah. Um, you need to get a commitment from the customer to continue working on the project to put pen to paper. Absolutely. Yes, it's
Okay.
kind of like I want to elaborate on that for a second. I think we have a minute. Um, it's kind of like the budget question. I see designers all the time that start designing a project and the customers have not given them a budget number. And I'm like, that's nuts. I mean, how many people would walk into a real estate agency and expect that agent to go shopping for houses for them if that agent doesn't know what their budget range is? They're not going to do it. It's not going to happen because that's just not realistic. You need to know what the customer's goals are.
Okay. So here's another one. So after you've made the sale and the cabinets have been ordered and installed, what will you what will you do or proceed to do next? A final walkthrough? And if that is the final walkthrough, what will that look like? Or what does that include?
What does that include? Um, well, many people out there are probably going to guess what I'm going to say, but that is the point at which uh, one generates a potential punch list to fix quote unquote potential issues if there are any. Um, the other thing that it would include to me is an overall reaction to the customer about their feelings about different aspects of the overall uh, design or installation quality. I hope that answers the question. I'm not really sure on that one. Debbie, are you muted on purpose?
Can you hear me okay,
I
Dwayne?
can now. You were on mute for
Okay.
some reason.
Sorry about that. So I think, yes, that does. I think that might be, if somebody wanted to actually email you with some more information about what they're looking for, they might want to do that. That would be my
Yeah, sure.
suggestion. Someone else is asking, how do you set yourself apart from box stores that sell the same product?
That's a great question. Uh, if it's the same product, literally, uh, then you have to find a way to create that unique experience. Chances are that if somebody is shopping at a big box store, they're not going to get a very unique experience. And it can be simple ideas. You walk into the showroom, the customer walks into the showroom. offer them coffee or tea or soda or something while you sit there and chat over things. It's the overall experience, the overall um, mood, the overall atmosphere. Um, to to point out an example, there's a reason why Starbucks is so successful. Not just because, I mean, yeah, they have good coffee, but is it worth $5 a cup of coffee? Probably not. But they've created an atmosphere that people enjoy so much, they're willing to spend that much to get that overall experience. So the best answer I have is create either an atmosphere or things you can do to go above and beyond for that customer that they weren't expecting. It's the unexpected value that isn't necessarily a tangible item. It's what can you provide that customer that is worth the overall experience.
But Dwayne, that's a really great answer. I think you're right. It is about experiences. And you've pointed that out earlier in the presentation. I have a final question here for you, because we
Mm-hmm.
only have a couple minutes left. And this person is saying many clients want to see that the total price is validated by seeing how much the various components and features contribute, such as the price is transparent. How would you
Mm-hmm.
address this?
Okay, well, if anybody on this session knows me, they know that I preach very strongly about not presenting itemized prices. Uh, it really not, and I suggest that for a number of reasons. Not to try to hide anything from the client. But if a client is going to ask me if I can itemize the prices, I would then simply open up the conversation by looking at them and saying, "Well, yes, I can. Let me ask you a question. Why do you want that information?" Because this total bottom line price is all inclusive of everything I just reviewed. Now at least I have a perspective of where they're coming from and why they want to look at it. Because it's been my experience that when they look at that itemized list, what is a customer going to do? They're going to gravitate to the most expensive items on the list and try to figure out ways to cut them. But what they don't have the overall picture of is what that does to the overall design. It may destroy the overall design if you try to eliminate that one really expensive item, and it might look lousy without it. But they are not looking at it with that perspective. They are just looking at that dollar amount. So here's kind of a stupid example, but and I use this all the time. Let's take that tall pantry cabinet that costs $1,500, and that simple wall cabinet costs, I don't know, $400. Okay. Well, if things were changed a little bit on that itemized pricing and you made that wall cabinet $900 and that tall pantry cabinet $1,000, they might not question that. But guess what? The total dollar amount, assuming I did my math right because I just did it in my head, is the same. So to me, the itemized price is kind of irrelevant, but more so by presenting the customer with an itemized price, you as a designer are giving over control to the customer of what should be removed if you need to lower the price, rather than you coming up with suggestions on what can be done to lower the price based on your knowledge of the design and your knowledge of the product, so that the design isn't destroyed, but you can still reduce the price. So hopefully that'll give you a different perspective on the whole itemized price thing. And some customers will still demand an itemized price, but at least I know where they're coming from and why. And if they do, will I give it to them? Yeah, I'm not going to get into an argument about it, but I don't think it's in the customer's. It really just lends to more confusion.
That's excellent. This has been an excellent presentation, Dwayne. I felt like you were sitting beside me next to the fire and chatting with me
Oh, that
about
sounds nice.
about how to run my design business. This has been awesome, and I want to thank all of you out there for being with us today. And
Yes, thank you very much.
thank you. And again, here's Dwayne's information if you want to contact him in the future. A lot of people are saying this has been great information, and I'm sure there'll be some more questions coming your way via email, Dwayne. But again, NKBA thanks you, I thank you, and I thank all of you for being here today. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks. Bye-bye.